people, but its design is not to necessarily teach a story. Its design is to make us ponder certain things, teach us certain things, using things like maxims and proverbial sayings and poetry, things like that. So Job is also in the wisdom literature. If you read the book of Job, it also has a lot of things discussing problems in life. It's a lot to it. Proverbs is sort of the foundation of the wisdom literature, and then Ecclesiastes as well. Now, I would say if a person is going to read Ecclesiastes, which we encourage you to do as we go through the series, it's a great idea to start first with Proverbs. Proverbs is sort of the foundational element of the wisdom tradition of Israel and in the Bible. Because Proverbs has basically what you might call general rules for wise living. Wise living is the idea of living skillfully in this world that we find ourselves in. Because these wisdom books ask this question, which is really two questions. What is the world? What's it like? And how should we live in it? So very, very practical. Talks about all kinds of things. Very, very practical, these books. So when we come to the wisdom literature, we understand that. So be prepared to wrestle and struggle and hear different things, because that's what the authors are going to do. That's where they're going to take us. So it's very important to kind of see the book through to the end to truly understand it. And so as we're in the wisdom literature, we ask ourselves, what about specifically Ecclesiastes? How would you characterize the way it is? And maybe how could we categorize it and break it down into sections? Think of it along the lines of a confessional notebook. You know, sometimes a famous person dies and they're like, yo, we found his notebook right next to his suicide note. Check it out. We're going to publish all his doodles and stuff like that, right? People make a big deal out of, Kurt Cobain or somebody's notebook. I think Leonardo da Vinci had some old notebooks that we found, and there's all kinds of amazing things in these notebooks. You're like, whoa, this guy was thinking of all kinds of stuff. And you look at this, and I know a lot of people probably think, I got a notebook, and when I die and someone's going to publish it, then I'll be famous after death. Maybe, maybe not. But if you think about the idea of a notebook, you kind of think about this being a confessional notebook. So I don't mean like the Usher song, Confessions. I don't mean like that kind of confessional. But somewhat similar, right? And if you look at it, it's these observations by Solomon. And the observations pertain to life under the sun. That's the refrain in the book again and again. Life under the sun. There's some debate. Some people say this is a view where he basically, the whole book says, what would life be like if no God was there? But the thing is, there are things about God in the book, even as he's talking about life under the sun. So it seems a little bit more like he's discussing life in a fallen world, because that's the world we live in. We do not live in a world that it's the way it's supposed to be. That's why everybody's like, let's fix this, let's do that. What's wrong? And we keep on out. This is not the way it's supposed to be, because this is not the original creation. It is in a fallen state. That's why there's earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, cancer, and everything else. Genesis 3. It's a world plagued with sin, inside, outside, everywhere. So this book recognizes that. This book helps balance out Proverbs, which Proverbs says if you do this, generally this thing will happen. Generally good. This book says sometimes you do whatever and it still doesn't work out. It's not a guarantee. This book is antithetical to the prosperity gospel, for example, which is like, come to Jesus. He's going to give you a new car. He's going to fix your marriage. He's going to get you a suit. He's going to get you a promotion. He's going to make your business prosper. Everyone's going to buy your t-shirts that you sell on the side. Boom. You just got to give enough money to this church. Now, those guys, they didn't predict there's not much prosperity going on in 2020. But we know true prosperity is more than finances anyway. So Ecclesiastes is saying, What is life in this fallen world if you kind of live as if God doesn't exist? Not that he doesn't, but he's over there. And you're going to see it's going to be kind of depressing at points. Because, guys, I know we got a couple Rocky fans in here. Yeah. What's that line he has, Aaron, where says, time's the only undefeated one? What's he say? You know what I'm talking about? Is that what he says? I think it's the last one when he's old. Well, one of the last two ones, he's like, maybe it's in Creed? Yeah, but he's talking about how time is undefeated. And time beats every boxer slows down. Time is undefeated. We are all marching towards death, Ecclesiastes says. And sometimes we think it's way over there, but a lot of times death comes and grabs you a lot sooner. And Ecclesiastes talks about that. What? Is it Creed? Okay, yeah, what's he say? So Creed, I knew, it's in the movies, I thought you would know. It's kind of like if I say, may the force be with you, but okay. Oh, goodness. No, not Star Trek.
Time takes everyone out, time's undefeated.
Time takes everyone out, time's undefeated. There's some of these folks like communist dictators and lots of other people, they actually think they'll live forever. Or they'll tell people, I'll never die. Or you see like they'll put out albums, immortal. Didn't Michael Jackson have a tour where he was like, I'm the immortal, and people do this. Like this larger than life. Seems like they could never die. But then everybody dies. And then they got some statue of them toppled over that nobody even remembers and we find it years later. This is life. Ecclesiastes notes this. Now, what about the author of Ecclesiastes? Technically, all it says in Hebrew is Koheleth. This means somebody who assembles or calls meetings together, right? So the idea is they're a teacher or a preacher because they're calling together for people to hear. But Koheleth is also called son of David in Ecclesiastes 1:1. David is the king of Israel, and he had a certain amount of sons, but not all of the sons were the king in Jerusalem. This person, Koheleth, is also called the king in Jerusalem. So you start to limit the people it could be. Not only that, 229 and 116 speak of this person surpassing all who were before them in Jerusalem. So all the other kings, this person is saying they were granted more wisdom than any of them. This is relevant to Solomon's biography. Solomon was a young man. He was faithful when he was young, it appears. God comes to him and says, what do you want, Solomon? It's sort of almost like the genie scenario. God is really what do you want? Solomon says, wisdom. God's like, you didn't ask for riches or whatever. You asked for wisdom. Because you asked for that, I'm going to give you those other things too. That's an excellent thing. A lot of us, God came to us, we'd be like, I want my own lane on the I-10, something silly like that, right?
I'm like, yes.
Yeah, you guys are like, that sounds really good. Solomon asked for wisdom, which surpasses all those things. So, the candidates for the authorship of this book on the human level are very limited and narrow. Not only that, and by the way, you can find that story, and this is in your notes. By the way, if you look at your notes that I've given you, we're in the section that says author. You can find that in 1 Kings 1:11 and 1 Chronicles 29, for example. Chapter 2, which I'm not doing tonight, though, we're going to do later, describes things Solomon did that would only seem to be available to King Solomon. Let me break it down. The unrivaled wisdom I mentioned, massive wealth, lots of servants, opportunities for sensual pleasure, 700 wives, 300 concubines, building activity. He was a builder, collector of Proverbs in 12:9, and other verses I have that all point to authorship by Solomon. Now, it's not a hill to die on, but it's out of fashion. So we talk about it and we're okay with it, but among scholars, it's out of fashion to say that Solomon wrote the book. Everyone's like, oh, this is an invented biography, maybe one of Solomon's advisors, or some, it's not, if you read a lot of commentaries, they don't want to say Solomon wrote it. Now, we don't stake things on tradition, but the Jewish tradition also states that Solomon was the author. In fact, there's even one version that has this idea of he wrote Psalms. He wrote the Psalms that he wrote and those kinds of things when he was younger. He wrote the Proverbs middle age, and he wrote Ecclesiastes towards the end of his life. Now, the Bible doesn't say that, but it kind of makes sense because if you read Ecclesiastes, it seems like an older person reflecting back on their life, now giving you that grandpa in a rocking chair wisdom. This is Solomon. But it's more than that because it's the inspired word of God. This book is very important for us to have a proper view of life because we get all puffed up and the book of Ecclesiastes pops the balloon for us. We need that. This is the bad news before the good news. In America, everything's optimistic. Win Super Bowls and go to Disney World, right? Win wars and make money. But that's not real life. That's not all there is to it. It's good to be optimistic, but we need to also be realistic. This book helps us have a realistic appraisal of life, its frailty, its uncertainty, and to a certain extent, its repetition. Now, this genre of wisdom literature is not unique to Israel. What I mean by that is, if you look at some of Israel's, what you might call cultural neighbors, there's a wisdom literature tradition as well. And so there's some parallel literature in Egypt, something called the Harper's Songs, because there's a focus on death. And that's because the Harper's Songs of Egypt were actually played at people's funerals. There's also certain complaints. You see the Egyptian complaints of Hakaperesambam. I don't know. It talks about cycles. You see the word there. It's hard to say. Maybe you've heard of this one, the Epic of Gilgamesh. There's some parallels there. The focus on mortality. But that's an epic poem. The other ones are songs. This book, Ecclesiastes, is none of those things. So while it's important to recognize there's parallels between Egypt, Babylon, Israel, as far as wisdom literature and some of the topics, this is still utterly unique in a class of its own. So sometimes if you pick up a book on Ecclesiastes, scholars will be like, the Hebrews are just copying off of everybody. You'll see that kind of stuff. They focus on minimal parallels when it'll be like a couple verses versus the overall message, which is very different. Ecclesiastes is utterly unique, even though we recognize some parallels. What about when it was written? Most likely 10th century BC. And again, it's out of fashion to say that. The book's date doesn't depend on its benefit for our lives in the way it glorifies God, but it's helpful to know. Probably around 940. Some want to push it to just maybe 200 years before Christ. Now, if that's the case, of course, Solomon could not have written it. And here's a brief argument. I know this is kind of off, but I want to just bring these things to you as well. There's ancient literature that it's clear Solomon is familiar with. But a highly literate Israelite society during the days of Solomon, before the exile, would have had access to some of this literature that he's clearly familiar with. That's why I mentioned the parallels. When Israel got exiled, you get a lot of stuff burned up, destroyed, then they come back from exile after the Babylonian exile, 70 years later or whatever, right? My point by saying that is that they don't have the same level of access to these older materials that he's familiar with. And so that pushes the date, I think, earlier during the time of Solomon. Some will say, oh, well, look, there's Persian loanwords, Aramaic influences. That can simply just point to a final update of this book during the Persian period. It does not have to mean it's written during the Persian period, which that'd be about 400 BC, 400 years before Christ. So I would argue for an earlier date. I think it's helpful for us to understand this in the light of Solomon's life. But again, it's not a hill to die on. But since it's a minority position, I think we should argue for it. Now, briefly, do you know the Bible, time and time again, is confirmed by archaeology? Yep. Now, it's a wild thing. You know, if you read the Book of Mormon, it talks about massive cities in North America. It talks about Native Americans having access to silk and horses and steel. They didn't have access to any of those things. But Book of Mormon claims all this. There wasn't massive cities in North America. Meaning the archaeology is against the Book of Mormon. It does not line up. And Joseph Smith said this stuff happened around New York. So because of that, Mormon scholars have been like, well, maybe actually he meant Mexico. So they go to Mexico to look for archaeological evidence of the Book of Mormon. This is true fact. This is what BYU archaeologist professors do. We don't have to do that because we look at things and see evidence. For example, Solomon was a builder, right? There is evidence of building activity, specifically doubling up defensive fortifications in the 10th century at Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer. These are places specifically mentioned that Solomon built in 1 Kings 9:15. Not only that, this one's not as certain, but there's a place called Ezion Geber, which was a port of Solomon, which is the modern-day city of Jordan. Israel's empire stretched pretty far out during this time into what would be modern-day Jordan. And the technical name for that is Tel El Khalifa. I have that written right there under that section. Just to let you know there's a real background, because you're going to see he's going to talk about, I built a bunch of stuff. We don't have all that stuff, which, by the way, is kind of in a way part of the book. He says you build stuff and then it gets destroyed. It's kind of proof. But there's some evidence of some of the stuff he did build. Now that goes to the next point, the key word of the book, which we talked about Saturday. I know some of you guys were here Saturday for the preaching lab. The key word is Hebel. Hebel. Vapor. Remember? Some of us smoke, some things we weren't supposed to, some things it's okay to smoke. But remember that vapor? You ever seen someone vape? Try to grab it. You see it? It's gone. That is the word that is used again and again in this book for your life. Your life, your accomplishments, your achievements, this book says, are Hebel. Vapor. Empty. Meaningless. Futile, which means no use. Vain, vanity, useless, nothing. All of it. Your wisdom, your effort, your human achievement, your life, your competition, sacrifice, power, greed, wealth, even religious rituals. Hebel. Under the sun. This is how the book starts, with this conclusion, in essence. You guys remember Columbo? Maybe you caught it on a rerun. I just got one more question for you, man. Something's bothering me. Remember this guy? I actually never watched it as a kid. I just familiar with the character. It's an old Italian guy. Although they didn't get an Italian to play him. Shame. Stealing all our roles. Columbo began with what? The murder, the crime being committed. And then you wanted to watch, I guess it was a popular show, you wanted to watch to see how Columbo figured it out. You've seen movies like that. Starts with the conclusion and the whole movie's about how they got into this mess, how they got there. Casino? Did they do that in Casino?
Shows him blowing up in the beginning.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. Perfect example. Casino. I knew you guys would be picking all the crime movies and all that stuff. I knew that's what I would get. No, but that's legit. That's exactly right. This, you got to look Goodfellas? Yeah, Goodfellas is similar, right? I always wanted to be a gangster. So, again, I don't know. I think Ray Liotta's half Italian, so I guess we'll let that side. I don't know how to look into that. Now, check this out. Begins with the conclusion, but then unfolds it, and in the middle, there's this key thing. Well, sort of towards the latter end, really. Because the book doesn't stay on depressing, but it doesn't have just some happy, neat ending either. Very interesting, fascinating book. If you think you're smarter than the Bible, read this book. It'll cut you down. You'll be like, whoa, this is in the Bible? What? I bet it'll shock you and surprise you. Let it do that. If you've been a Christian for a while, you never looked into this, look into this. And you may be like, well, this don't sound right. Keep on reading. Everything is not a microwave. Some things are slow cooked, right? Yeah. You know the difference between you let it marinate all day versus putting three-minute button? It's a difference, isn't there? This book is slow cooked. Deal with it. That's part of being mature, right? We don't just always eat. Now, the big question of the book is, there's a lot of ways you can phrase this, but one thing I would say is, what is the good life? The Greeks used to talk about the summum bonum, the good life. The answer is ultimately going to be given in chapter 12, 13, 14. So you got to wait for it. The big idea, I think, of the book is that wisdom, pleasure, and work alone are worthless. But God gives meaning to those things. And that's really it. Only God gives meaning to life. Now, this book has some beautiful New Testament connections. It's an Old Testament book, but there's ways that it ties in. I've already mentioned one. It sort of sets the stage of the bad news before the good news. Let me give you an example. You know, Jesus said that the wise man, the wise woman builds their house upon the rock, but the fool does so on sinking sand. I'm no architect, but I know you want to lay a foundation on something solid, not on top of a water table, for example, right? We know that. Not on sand. And I don't know, you see some of those houses in Scottsdale, they're on the corner of a mountain. Whatever you people want to do, sure.
Yeah.
I guess you have a helicopter you can jump in and fly away when it falls off, but whatever. That's foolish, the Bible says. Jesus says, build your house on me. He's saying he is the foundation to your life. So people are like, oh, Jesus is a cool teacher. Jesus is saying, I'm the foundation of life. I'm not a dead Muhammad. I'm not a dead Buddha. I'm not just a wise guy, wisest man. I am the foundation to your very life. The rock. What Ecclesiastes does is say, that stuff you've been building your life on, it's sinking sand. It's foolish. It is grasping after the wind. It's hard enough to kill a fly. Try to catch the wind. Can't do it. It's impossible. That's our life. Paul talks about that in Romans 8:20 in regards to the state of the world. There's other connections. The parable of the rich fool, Matthew 12:20. Colossians 2:3 describes Jesus as the sort of the true wisdom. James 4:14, Matthew 12:42, Jesus says that one greater than Solomon is here. So Solomon is given wisdom, but then he squanders it because of his lack of really living a godly life. Jesus is the true wisdom, who also is the perfect true king of Israel. I'm going to read a little quote here because I like the way they put this, and then we're going to read verse 1. It's at the bottom here. And this is a summary of some of the New Testament connections to this book. And I like the way they wrote this. His dreary picture of wearying toil paved the way for the master's call from taxing labor to gracious rest. Because Jesus said, if you're heavy laden and burdened, come to me, I'll give you rest. This book shows you need rest. Jesus says, I'll give you rest. His command to enjoy God's simple gifts without anxiety found echo in Jesus' exhortations to trust the God of the lily and the sparrow. Jesus said, hey, God watches these little bugs and these little birds and these little plants. Trust him to watch you. Don't worry about this day and worry about the day. Jesus is basically saying enjoy the moment. It doesn't have to be a hedonistic, wild instruction to say enjoy the moment. God is saying enjoy the moment. Some of you are stuck here. Maybe your parents brought you here. Maybe you're here out of obligation. Enjoy the moment. See what you can get out of it. Enjoy the moment. Continue on. His verdict of vanity set the stage for Paul's comprehensive evaluation, for the creation was subjected to futility. With burning eye and biting pen, Koheleth, that's the author, challenged the overconfidence of the older wisdom and its misapplication in his culture. Basically the idea of, hey, you do X, Y, Z, everything will work out for you. This book says the formulas don't always work. And the question is, what are you going to do when they don't work? Someone says, hey, trust God, do this, and everything will work out. What if it doesn't work out the way you wanted? It'll test your perception of God. Yeah. Thereby he prepared for the one greater than Solomon, that's Jesus, in whom are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Quote from Colossians 2:3. Now, when you look at this, I want you to think of the movie Groundhog Day. I've actually never seen Groundhog Day, but I watched some clips to understand it before this. Came out in '93, got Bill Murray, What happens? Stuck in the same day over and over again. What's some of the stuff he tries? You guys remember? What's he try stuck in this day? At one point, he does. We'll get to that. That's exactly right. At one point, for example, he realizes there's no consequences to his actions, so he just wiles out, just does whatever. He's just mean to whoever, does whatever, doesn't answer people. And then there's a part where there's this lady he wants, and so he's stuck in the same day, but everyone else is experiencing a new day. So he wakes up at 5:59 a.m. to the same song. He wakes up, and then he's living the same day. And he's like, this just happened. They're like, what do you... At one point, he tries to use his knowledge of the day that's already transpired to win this lady over, but it doesn't work because it's clear he's still self-centered. Then he realizes, I'm doing the same thing every day and has no effect on anything in time. The next day, it resets all over. So then he starts killing himself in these days. Jumps off a building, throws a toaster in the bathtub, steps in front of a truck. Because, hey, if you live the same exact monotonous day over and over again and has no effect or no impact, what's the point of repeating it? Guess what? This is something that secular philosophers have talked about. There's a guy named Camus. He says the big philosophical question is whether or not to kill yourself, suicide. Because nothing matters. It's like a Monopoly game and it just gets reset at the end. It doesn't matter. You guys ever been playing a video game, gets cut off before you got some certain level, gets cut off, and you're all upset? Oh, man, but guess what? It doesn't really matter anyway if it was saved. It's a game. Whoa, vocab, why are you talking against my game? It doesn't matter. I'm not saying don't play video games. Enjoy the moment, right? But when you're on your deathbed, you ain't going to be like, man, I could have got 32 kills in Call of Duty. It doesn't matter even if you did save it because it doesn't matter. When Bill Murray recognizes that in Groundhog Day, he just starts killing himself. And eventually, after 30 or some days, he realizes, I could change. And he starts actually putting others in front of himself, changing people's tires, saving kids. He starts helping people with this knowledge he's gained from these redundant days. And in doing that, he finally finds enjoyment in the moment, even though it's the same thing every day. And the wild thing is, then that lady he was trying to win is finally attracted to him because he's not a selfish jerk like he was the whole movie. And then he wakes up one day and it's actually the next day. He's no longer stuck in that same cycle. It's actually kind of deep for a comedy, if you think about it. This book is saying your life without recognizing God is Bill Murray's Groundhog Day. Ecclesiastes 1:1. In the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Vain, vapor, empty. That's what that means. Hebel. Hebel of Hebel, says Koheleth. Hebel of Hebel, all is Hebel. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? What do you gain? You worked there for 30 years and they fire you. You worked there for 20 years, the boss is corrupt, the company collapses, you have no 401k. You worked there for so-and-so, idiot son of the boss comes in, gets a promotion after a week because he's the boss's son. You work real hard, save your money, and then your kids spit it all on Las Vegas trips. And that was your whole life savings as a postman. It's gone. This is all true, what I'm saying. And all of you know exactly what I'm talking about. So what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? Feel the weight of that. A generation goes and a generation comes. The earth remains forever. So that mountain, South Mountain's just going to be there when you're dead. And it was here before you came around. And maybe an ugly little mountain down there, but it's South Mountain and it's still here and you're dead. And then your kids and your grandkids, and then South Mountain is just still there. This is crazy. A generation goes and comes. I wanted to try this out. So I called my grandpa Polino in Buffalo, New York. last week. And I said, because I didn't really grow up with him, it's kind of a long story, but he's around now. And so I gave him a call and I said, can you tell me about any of our family members from Sicily? Well, how about this? What is your full legal name? So he knew that, Giuseppe Polino. What was your father's name? He knew that, and he knew his mother's name. And it's not like just a dementia thing. I don't know if he really ever paid attention. He doesn't know their middle names. He doesn't know their birthdays. He doesn't know what part of Sicily they lived in. He doesn't know what year they arrived in New York. If anyone's going to remember you, you hope it's your kids, right? And even if they do remember you, they try their best to pass on the information to the next family members, and they don't care. They're looking at a device. And then he dies, I die, and no one even knows those people that came over here. And no one even knows about them. This happens. How many generations can you go back? You know, we walk around, oh, I'm full-blood of this, I'm full-blood of that. No one really knows. We don't know how much Spanish and how much, we don't know how much, we don't know. We walk around, right? And that's why people were like, do the DNA test. They're like, oh my gosh. No one really knows. How far back can you go? A couple generations if you're 4, maybe 3, maybe 4. And half the times you find out these stories you heard aren't true. You ask the person later, I'm like, oh, that's not what happened at all. No, actually, he was a total alcoholic. He wasn't a war hero. He got kicked out because, stuff like that, right? Vanity. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. Predictable cycle. It's never not happened. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, where they flow again, all things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be. And what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Jeez. You look around and the tsunami doesn't hate you when it smashes your house and kills you. It's just it's all just an effect from something else. It's the laws of physics in action. You have opposite and equal reactions, and next thing you know, it's not personal. You can throw your shoe at the sea, it doesn't care. It's going to do it. The tsunami would happen whether your house was there or not. This is life under the sun. Now, when it says nothing new, the idea is, I hope we understand, the more things change, the more they stay the same. For example, even, you got your smartphone. It's simply, if you understand it, an extension of your body. You see things, you hear things, you touch things. And it can't even do all the things your body can do. Farm equipment, farm equipment is simply an extension, in a way, of the human body. It's doing something that we could do in a different way. It's just these things. And it's made out of stuff that was already here. Sometimes we discover it, but it's already there in the earth in some way. We can mix it in a different way, and there it is. And sometimes we are like, whoa, we just found out the Egyptians were doing brain surgery. How did they do that? I'm not saying it was aliens. Must have been aliens, right? Those guys? Yeah. By the way, I'm not really saying that. I'm just saying people, that's what they say, because they're like, how do these people from long ago have these smart ideas? Because you're not smarter than them. Just because you can hold an iPhone in your hand doesn't make you smarter than those people from a long time ago. In fact, I bet they knew the math better than you, because they didn't push buttons. They'd actually work it out, and they'll look at the stars and do all this, and then they got a pyramid, and then, right?
Right. That way.
Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things. nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. Amen. We're done. We are actually almost done. Here's how it goes. The book's going to take us on a ride. It's going to explore different things. There's going to be catalogs of vanities. This kind of catalog of vanities really had to do with sort of the cycles in creation. You guys remember back in the day before the internet, there was actually a real thing called catalogs. You get a JCPenney catalog. Yeah. As a kid, I would always turn right to the toy section. Just be like, oh. And then, that kind of thing. They don't have those anymore. Now you just go to the internet and a catalog, grouping things together, showing you this. This book is sort of a catalog of vanities. Here's the way this thing is vain. Your work, here's the way this thing is vain. Your wisdom, here's the way this thing is vain and vapor. It's going to show you all these things. This catalog of vanities. So you can see, without God, there is no meaning. There is no rhyme. There is no reason. Now again, this paves the way for the gospel. Because your work and your effort has eternal meaning if it's attached to an eternal being, the God who is forever. So instead of building up your own personal kingdom, you're building up God's kingdom, of which you are able to be a part of through Christ and other people. We're supposed to be, and we know this is hard, the Bible says living sacrifices. We are living for others in those moments. And the crazy thing is, that's how we find true joy and peace, not by living for ourselves. Why did the people who have the most still commit suicide? Living for yourself does not make you happy. It never does. Living for the Creator is what you were made to do, and guess what? It'll also bring you joy. That's right. So the work you do, it is glorious in the sight of God if you're working for Him. But if it's your own personal kingdom, it's going to get washed away. It doesn't matter. So keep this in mind as we go through this. Understand, this is pointing us to the need for the gospel, the need for us to attach ourselves to our Creator, our Maker, the need for us to have eternity in mind instead of just the next day. That's what it's going to point us to, but it's going to take a while to get there. So I pray that you guys read this book throughout this time. It's going to take us for at least 3 months. I don't know. How long you got it mapped out for? End of January, yeah. So this will be an excellent thing. I hope this was a helpful introduction. But keep this in mind as we go through this, and I believe God will bless you. With that, let's pray, y'all. Heavenly Father,